Okay. Patterns program is about creating regional thinking. And I've asked 4 friends to come and have a conversation with me and amongst themselves about regionalism. They're all experts in their own fields. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, but one thing that strikes me is that each of them have the opportunity to focus on the area that they specialize in, which enables them to make their lives slightly easier than patterns, which is often a tad scattered because we're about the quality of life, and often people say, what is it exactly that you do? But each one of them actually have developed expertise, and I have great admiration for all 4 of them, and I hope you will too when we're done with this discussion. So, Aimee, you want to start first? Just introduce yourself.
I'm Aimee Vargas. I'm the Mid-Hudson Regional Director for Empire State Development. And the person that I have a lot of admiration for is all the gentlemen that are sitting next to me, because I have to say that each and every one of them have contributed so much to the success of what we've been doing with the Mid-Hudson Regional Economic Development Council, with Empire State Development, and then just in this governor's administration, and we call them all friends. So thank you very much for having me, Jonathan, and I look forward to the discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Todd Erling. I'm the Executive Director of Hudson Valley AgriBusiness. We're a regional non-for-profit that focuses on agriculture as economic development, and with economic development, we have multi-year relationships with 7 counties, which include Sullivan, Orange, Dutchess, Ulster, Columbia, Rensselaer, and Washington. And I have the pleasure of working kind of on the inside on committee work in the Mid-Hudson Region Economic Development Council, and I'm actually a voting member and an executive committee member on the Capital Region Economic Development Council.
Good afternoon. My name is Harold King. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Council of Industry of Southeastern New York. We're based here in Newburgh. We are a regional manufacturers association. I've been doing this for 23 years or so, and I just want to congratulate Jonathan. I know this fellow's idea was kind of a brainchild of his, and it's hard to believe that 7 years has passed. That's way too quick. But as Jonathan said, their mission is vague. Ours is very clear. We support our we are a membership association. Did I say vague? I meant all-encompassing and important, vital mission. But ours is very narrow. We are a business association, so our mission is to promote the success of our members. Through our 104 years, that's changed quite a bit, but not entirely. So we have an excellent board of directors that helps me, guide that mission, and it's been a good ride, and we've been able to enact some change, and we also have the benefit of having been a regional organization from our birth. So that certainly helps when we talk about regionalism.
Good afternoon. I'm Ned Sullivan. I'm president of Scenic Hudson, and I'm privileged to be here with this august panel. Privileged to work with Jonathan, and thank you for your vision and for getting out there the concept of regionalism, which is vital to our work. So privileged also to work with Aimee and Todd under Governor Cuomo's leadership on the Mid-Hudson Regional Economic Development Council. And Scenic Hudson is an environmental organization and a land conservation organization, but we see the benefits of regionalism as a force in economic development and environmental protection, and feel those things go hand in hand. Scenic Hudson has been around for 50 years. We started out protecting a single mountain in the Hudson Valley, but grew to a regional group, and I think the power is in mobilizing citizens throughout the valley to achieve win-win outcomes, protecting the environment and the economy.
Thanks, Ned. So you can see I've clearly stacked the deck here. I have brought in 4 friends of mine who engage in regionalism, and so I'd like to start with the first question and each of you can do this, which is basically, I struggle with this every day, but the strengths and weaknesses of trying to have a regional approach. And so we'll just reverse this. And so Ned, if you could start with sort of like what is, the most positive sort of element of trying to approach the environment and the protection of the river from a regional basis, and then how does it become difficult to do it regionally?
Right. So our work extends from New York City all the way up to the Troy and Albany area. And we approach our work by bringing together people on the ground, citizens, environmental leaders, business leaders, to try to achieve those kinds of win-win outcomes. And I think the regional approach just makes eminent sense because we use the regional infrastructure as in a sense, a corridor of our work. So, of course, the river is the centerpiece of the Hudson Valley from a natural resource perspective, but we also have the Metro North and Amtrak railway lines that run up the east side of the river. And many of our parks, Scenic Hudson has created 60 parks and preserves. We've protected about 30,000 acres of land, and we work in communities along the river. And the regional infrastructure, particularly Metro North and Amtrak, become places where people from the city or from the communities of the Hudson Valley can access our parks. And we collaborate with Metro North in promoting tourism throughout the valley, and with Hudson Valley and county tourism agencies to market the Hudson Valley as a region, as a destination, and to make people realize, whether they're New York City residents or residents of towns and villages and cities throughout the valley, that there are these tremendous natural resources that they can access for hikes, for kayaking, for fishing, for going down and enjoying music by the river. And so there's a great opportunity to promote and create a sense of stewardship and ownership of these great assets. The bringing together of regional leaders is something that Aimee has really spearheaded so beautifully under Governor Cuomo's Mid-Hudson Regional Economic Development Council. And so it's been just fantastic to serve and to be among people who understand that we have tremendous assets in the Hudson Valley, both economic and natural resource, that can be the very foundation of prosperity in the region. And so we work together to meld those natural and economic assets to create jobs. And the other thing is, and Governor Cuomo has again provided great leadership in this context, preparing for both good outcomes and preparing for the worst. I think the governor's economic development councils are preparing for the good, using the regionalism as an engine and an organizing principle for putting forward economic development strategies. But we can also prepare for the worst. And in the wake of Superstorm Sandy and the other hurricanes that have caused such incredible damage throughout the region, the governor has mobilized communities and regional leaders to prepare for the future and to lay the groundwork for adaptive strategies that acknowledge climate change, which he's emerged as a leader on, leading spokesman, that climate change is here and now and we have to just prepare for it. So let's change the way we plan on a community by community and on a regional basis. Just to hit the weaknesses in closing, I think, as Tip O'Neill said, all politics are local, and then everybody lives where they live. And I think most people think about, if you ask somebody where they're from, they say their town. Well, whenever I'm traveling, I say I'm from the Hudson Valley of New York State, and it gets people's attention. And I think we have a constant challenge to promote the Hudson Valley and to brand it. I had the privilege of working at another time in my life as a founding board member of the Hudson Valley Economic Development Corporation. And that's a group that markets the Hudson Valley as a region. And we found that the great strength was the beauty, the natural resource, the access to the park. But it's a constant challenge to get it out there that the Hudson Valley as a region has unique assets, terrific people, great leadership, and that we can achieve things collectively.
Yeah, I actually you prompted me. I actually do the same thing. Whenever I'm away and people say, where are you from? I don't just say New York. I say the Hudson Valley of New York. We're a little north of the city. People actually know it now. I think we're actually making strides. For us, regionalism, for the Council of Industry, regionalism really is about economies of scale and critical mass. Our mission, as I said, is what our members want it to be, and right now that focuses on workforce development issues. It focuses on tax and regulatory issues, and the advocacy that goes along with that. And for us, in any individual county or town, there's just not enough of a voice. There's not enough people. There's not enough resources to make it work. So by broadening that to the entire region, we are able to do more and better things. We're able to do more training at a higher level. We're able to access more resources, whether they're federal or state resources or just the private sector resources of our members. So it's really a fact of doing business for our association, and without it, we really could not exist. As far as the challenges go, there are plenty to regionalism, and just because it's not a political organization. it's our sense of where we are, and if we're looking for resources, we need to bring the different political entities within the region together to access something, and that's why I don't always give lots of kudos to the governor, but I really do for the Regional Economic Development Councils and the work Aimee's been doing, because it really gives us a unique strategy, and it gives us a chance to identify who we are and access our resources as a region, not just as a bunch of counties or townships or local organizations. So that's a great thing for us, but it still continues to be a challenge at the political level that there is no government of the Hudson Valley. I'm not advocating for that, by the way.
So I like to illustrate regionalism through everyday experience that we all have. And who here is growing their own food in a garden? This is a good time of year. Who here is actually growing some food for friends and family, maybe sharing a garden, community garden? Who did chores before they came here this morning? Aimee knows the next line, but who here eats? Okay, we all eat. We all just experience the fact that agriculture, market opportunities, production, by default, are not only regional, but they're also national and international. And we appreciate the fact that we all live in a town, we all live in a community, but we also appreciate the fact that there's reciprocity, and there are imports and exports. And that's a necessity, industry and larger scale manufacturing, but also in our local economies. Even the most basic mom and pop Main Street store has a level of regionalism, whether it's through supply or whether it's through market. And it's just important to be conscious of that and have that dialogue and not build walls or have misperceptions about boundaries that really don't exist. So for agriculture, we appreciate the lines on a map that define town. We appreciate the lines on the map for a county. But that really just tells you where you're going to vote and who you're paying taxes to. That doesn't necessarily define market opportunity or your necessary supply chains within your industry, equipment, veterinary, expertise in crop protection, nutrition management. And so one of the things that we're born of is actually a study that American Farmland Trust undertook early in the 2000s that illustrated that if we didn't approach some of the challenges for agriculture in the Hudson Valley from a regional perspective, agriculture was going to have a harder time and potentially more failure than we currently do. And to the governor's credit, he actually used a model that he used in Washington through HUD. And we knew that. We watched that kind of happen through USDA, Department of Commerce, EDA, HUD, some of these groups that were saying you need to be looking at things beyond town boundaries and county boundaries. You need to be having regional strategies. And so his model of bringing that to New York was really groundbreaking because it is a model of success, and it does give us that opportunity. I'll give you another example of regionalism and how it works. I was kicked in the face by one of my horses on my farm 2 years ago. I went to my local hospital. My wife drove me. But I relied on a regional medical center to undergo 4 hours of surgery and multiple pieces of titanium to get me back to where I am today. That could not happen in an individual town or county hospital in our region. And I live in Columbia County. I mean, we were relying on Albany Medical Center to make that happen and get me back to this table. Now, where doesn't it work? It doesn't work when we don't keep in mind our role as individuals in a greater system, and at times shut down and start thinking about egocentricity. We always have to recognize, and a great example of this right now is we're undergoing a Ginsberg's Food Project, which is a distribution center that has a footprint that seems enormous to the town that it's going in. But it's actually a distribution center that's going to serve from Boston to Philadelphia. And that town, we're having a dialogue with that town saying, you are going to be bearing a burden more than just what your town is using this distribution center for. But if we want to make sure we have the capacity to be getting local product owned by a local company into restaurants in Columbia County, into restaurants in the Hudson Valley, we need a facility that's actually a little bit larger than what the town, again, thinks they need for their own food needs.
Going back to Jonathan's question, I don't know necessarily that there is a negative to regionalism. I think, if anything, there are challenges that I think each one of us would identify and probably agree with. And from my perspective, and I think when Jonathan and Ned first participated in the Mid-Hudson Regional Economic Development Council, it was that we represented 7 counties, from Sullivan to Westchester on both sides of the river. And the needs that those counties brought to the table and their individual communities brought to the table were so incredibly unique that part of the question was, how would we address all of this and how would we make it work so that folks would have their individual communities feel represented, but we would also be able to move economic development policy in such a manner that we would be able to create jobs, increase investment, and actually create opportunities for our region and therefore throughout the state. So from my perspective, I think part of what we do so well on the Regional Economic Development Council is the fact that we provide that table where everybody sits around it and has real discussions as to what it is that we need to do as a greater community. You know, the consolidated funding application, which many of you may be aware of, ended yesterday. And one of the things that folks asked me about was, how do I make my application stronger? And I said, well, don't think about your community only, think about your community, which, you know, is not just the villages that you live in or the towns that you live in, although, you know, as a former town employee, I certainly am mindful of those types of constraints and the challenges that they face. But you have to think about the larger community that you live in, and how is it that your individual projects are going to be beneficial, not just to your village, your town, your city, your county, but also looking across the 7 counties. And, you know, this year, the governor has asked the regional councils to step it up even more and not just look at our intra-regional collaboration, but our inter-regional collaboration. So we're talking to New York City, we're talking to the capital region, we're talking to the North Country, because ultimately what works here, if we do it well, can be replicated and modeled in other areas of the state so that they can succeed as well. And as all of us, you know, as us individually rise, we all rise. So from my perspective, there's not so much, again, not so much negative versus the challenges that we face, to think bigger and to think about how we're going to affect change in a greater capacity than just in our backyards.
As some of you may know, I'm from New York City. So, you know, New York City is the ultimate example of a consolidation. It is 5 counties that operates under one mayor, 8.3 million people. And then I move up to the Hudson Valley and I find out that, you know, for every 20 people, there's a mayor, there's a town supervisor, there's somebody, and the system is like, I don't understand how this ever got invented. But interestingly, you know, at least from my days in New York, if you were from Brooklyn, you said you were from Brooklyn. But if you were from Queens, you always said the neighborhood you were from. So I was from Bayside. I never said I was from Queens. Todd, you mentioned that there's this project you're working on, and you don't have to identify the project where the town plays a role in it. And I'm certainly aware of one concerning my county that is maybe having a tad difficulty getting it going. What's the biggest stumbling block to regionalism from home rule and the town? And do you have an example of that? And what do we do about that to try to get towns, villages, even counties at sometimes to embrace this concept of regionalism? We'll start with you.
Sure, thank you. So yeah, I wore the specifics on my sleeve there, and that's because I think it's important to attach dialogue to faces and names and circumstances, and we live in a community where transparency is valued. But one of the things that I'm very sensitive to, my academic background is as an architect and a planner from my bachelor's and graduate work, is this idea of responsibility to your community. A planning board or a town board or a county board of supervisors is beholden to their constituency, and the function of the way they are sitting at the Diaz or in their elected position is based on the interaction and representation of individuals and stakeholders. But they also hold a responsibility to have an honest dialogue with those stakeholders, to recognize opportunities and roles that towns or municipalities can play that serve a greater good than just necessarily what we see in our everyday life or in our neighborhoods and towns. And so that dialogue is what we really try to show. It's at the basis of the U.S. and our own economy, is that there is this reciprocity, and that we do have to interact with greater constituency and greater neighborhood and community than just what we think of when we identify ourselves, whether it is by the neighborhood or by the borough. And sometimes it just takes talking about it and pointing it out, or kind of saying, ho, 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 I respect right now that you're sitting at a planning board and that you feel the responsibility to ensure quality of life, aesthetics, lack of light pollution to the 5 people on this road. And that's very important. But we also need to think about what happens beyond the end of this road, where it intersects with the county road, and then where that county road intersects with a state road, and then where that state road intersects with the federal highway system. Because that's the fact of life, and that's where we're living. And we're all relying inside our households, inside our businesses, on that interaction, and that we're having everything from a domestic interaction in our town with our family up through international interactions every day on a daily basis, and we rely on it. Bang.
I have lots of questions, but I'd like to open it up. Does anyone in the audience, you have 4 of the most talented people sitting here, anyone have a question that you would like to pose? Oh, don't be shy. Kevin?
Thank you, John. Kevin O'Connor, Rumco in Houston. So, environmental review process and how we govern that at the local level. We're going to talk about regions. Is there any support for bringing some aspect of environmental review up to a regional level and take it away from town by town? I would submit that apart from the plethora of savings that we might by avoiding some of the redundant studies we do in town after town, that many of the true environmental concerns, stormwater, stream erosion, flooding, groundwater, none of these obey boundary lines. And if we're going to apply real science, it can be done at a much more rigorous review process, I think, at a regional level. And so I'm just wondering if you guys, if there's any support for trying to revisit that. I know home rule is the third rail, but that's how we're currently doing it.
I mean, I think Scenic Hudson, their food shed study is an example of how you can have the dialogue and the control. You can have the dialogue and the control and the review process on a local level, but as long as they're taking into account higher levels of expertise and engaging in potentially regional assets and resources to truly go through an exercise of weighing the impact or potential for other scenarios. I mean, I think it can be done with still having home rule managing the process. Where I get very concerned is where the process ends and begins inside the town hall. And I don't say that from a political sense, but from a geographic sense.
Oh, so very interesting question, Todd. Thanks for talking about Scenic Hudson's regional food plan. We've Scenic Hudson, in addition to creating these parks along the river, we have protected 86 working farms, 12,000 acres, and it's another example of regionalism where we've preserved these farms permanently one by one, but they form a critical mass in subregions of the valley, like in the town of Red Hook. More than 54% of the working farms in that town are protected. And same goes for areas of northern Columbia County, and now we're working in Ulster, and now we've sort of broadened the entire program to be the 11 counties of the Hudson Valley, collaborating with other regional land trusts and linking that to New York City, the big market there for that food, and something we're collaborating with Todd on in many ways. So another example of regionalism that we think is working. In terms of the State Environmental Quality Review Act and having that regional perspective, I think it's a very good concept. Jonathan spearheaded an effort some years ago to look at seeker and to find ways to make it more efficient and to enable the Department of Environmental Conservation, which has where there's always or frequently the opportunity for them to play the lead agency role. So, I think when DEC takes the lead agency role and coordinates the environmental review, they bring to bear certainly a regional perspective. And I think you're pointing to the fact that projects have a regional impact, both beneficial and conceivably adverse. And I think the idea of incorporating into those reviews a broader regional perspective is a very positive one.
All right. My panelists may be all, John, so I'll tell you, I'll take a shot at this since I was talking to the fellows about this. And having lived in Sullivan and lived with all the residents there who for 50 years have chased this dream of having gaming, I think it's very interesting that I for one have to wear two hats on this, that I live in Sullivan and I am a regionalist. And from a regional point of view, where the casino is sited theoretically can have benefits for almost any of the communities involved, whether it's Orange, Ulster, or Sullivan. There are different formulas for the benefits, for host community benefits, but we all travel to jobs. So quite frankly, if it's 30 minutes away or 45 minutes away, the job is there and the job was created. And so, there's that aspect of it. There's also the aspect of it that, the debate that you're referring to, John, is that the folks in Sullivan believe there was intent, that somehow it was meant for them. Well, that's a nice way to look at it, and I live there, but in fact, the entire state got to vote on it. It wasn't a vote of just Sullivan County, and therefore everyone was allowed to express an opinion, and the way that the referendum was written says, do you think Sullivan County alone, or do you think upstate counties are entitled to it? And I don't think that's exactly what people voted for. On the other hand, the way that the state wrote the criteria for selection were very heavily weighted towards revenue. And revenue, this happened in Sullivan County long before this referendum, was a constant leapfrogging along Route 17 to try to get closer to the Orange County border on the belief that you were closer to the New York City market and therefore could generate the most amount of revenue. Well, the legislation allows for a casino to be sited in Orange County, therefore closer to New York City. And to my friends in Sullivan County, what's happening in Orange County really is no different than what happened in Sullivan. They're trying to see how close to the New York City market they could get. Quite frankly, most of that becomes somewhat irrelevant in 7 years, according to the legislation. Because in 7 years, 3 can be created south of Orange County, including New York City. So it really does give a head start, but that's about it. And it's supposed to create a regional tourism destination. And it's still possible for Sullivan to do that. It's possible for Orange to do that. And it's possible for Ulster to do that. And so if you're looking for a precise answer, there isn't one. It was set up, as the governor did many of his things that we've done in the regional council, through a competition.
I would just add, I mean, as someone who has feet in multiple regions, and we work a lot with Berkshire Grown, we work a lot with Connecticut. Obviously, there's impacts in communities there. I grew up in Pennsylvania. The initiative for the Allentown, Lehigh, Bethlehem area, and what the casino effort was in Pennsylvania. This is not unique. What's happening here in this end of the valley is actually happening up in the Capital Region and the Mohawk Valley as well. So study the Times-Union headlines and study Poughkeepsie and the Times-Herald Record headlines, and just substitute the town's names and the county's names. It's part of the process. It's kind of inherent to the process, and we have to go through the process and let it play out.
Okay, let me move the question to, if there's one thing that you would change about each of your organizations in order to make it more, to make it easier to engage in regionalism, what would it be? I mean, I sort of dream about this all the time in terms of pattern, but it's sort of like, what is it that I'm missing? And all 4 of you have to struggle with this all the time in order to have your voices felt in your respective subject areas. So, anyone want to start?
Yeah, I actually have an idea on it.
So, surprise, right? So naming our organization Hudson Valley is one of our greatest strengths, but is also one of our greatest weaknesses. As we have become a success in working at what we have done, a great example is Sullivan, where there's illustrations all the time that, well, they're actually Delaware River Valley, not Hudson River Valley. Or as the Mohawk Valley starts interacting with us because of our success at Farm to Table Co-Packers and some of our regional efforts, that's the Mohawk Valley. Or where does the Hudson Valley end? Where does it begin? That being said, we've never once actually stopped that. We want to show that we're willing to work beyond the perceived or known boundaries of the Hudson Valley, because quite frankly, there's a necessary reciprocity that has to happen there. So we do work in the Berkshires, as I mentioned earlier. We actually do work up in Vermont now. We're representing an area from Warren, Washington down to New York City and over to Sullivan that rivals the footprint of the state of Vermont. And one of our prime partners is actually Vermont state programs, because we're now recognizing we have the same scale and scope and can benefit one another. So I would just throw out there are times where geographic specific is a strength, but then sometimes it can limit you, and you want to make sure that your mission and your intent has the flexibility to go beyond just those boundaries and recognize why, and have an honest dialogue about why I might be doing a project out in the San Francisco area or down in the Shenandoah Valley area. Because all of those areas have assets that we can be bringing back to the market opportunity and the supply opportunity that we service.
So Todd stole one of my answers, but when we were founded in 1910, we were the Mid-Hudson Industrial Association, and somewhere along the line we had the bright idea of changing our name to the Council of Industry of Southeastern New York, which really does not label us accurately. It was, I think, a noble idea to maybe expand our market, but it didn't really work very well. So an easy thing, but perhaps something that takes a little bit of effort is to maybe go back to that name of your And the other thing is kind of more of a technical thing, is we're incorporated as a C6 organization for all you accountants out there, and so we are a business organization. It makes it a little more difficult to apply for funding from certain from government entities as well as foundations. And the idea of forming another foundation, so to speak, to accept grants would be something that I think would help us fulfill our mission and help our members. But we struggle with that. It's not necessarily the right answer for us. So it is an ongoing discussion amongst our board.
So Scenic Hudson's focus is the region. We have great partners at the regional and state level, and we periodically intervene and lobby on federal issues, and because we have a very strong congressional delegation and great partnerships there, I find that we can kind of swing above our weight limit and have impacts on targeted areas. But we face a challenge right now of unprecedented risk to the Hudson Valley. You've heard President Obama talk glowingly about the fact that the United States has now become a major producer of crude oil. And what we've found is that a tremendous amount of that crude oil that's being produced domestically rather than imported from the Middle East is passing through the Hudson Valley by rail and in ships. And this represents a risk of unprecedented proportion to the assets that my organization has been working to protect for 50 years. Governor Cuomo has called on the president and taken a number of important actions to alert federal government to its responsibility to protect our region from this, as well as taken actions at the state level. But we find ourselves somewhat challenged to use our regional capabilities in coordination with other regional organizations that are concerned about this kind of thing to safeguard the Hudson Valley, because just as an example, the first tanker ship to transport crude oil down the Hudson, and it's a new highly volatile form of crude oil that comes in from North Dakota. The first ship to transport this product down the Hudson ran aground. It had an almost equal amount of crude oil to the Exxon Valdez, which 25 years ago ran aground and spilled and caused a disaster along the Alaska coast, wiped out the commercial fishing industry. So all of the things that we have worked for 50 years as an organization to protect are at risk. The good news is that it ran aground. It only punctured one hull. So most of the tankers are double hulled, but if there were a crash into a bridge or into another vessel, it could go through both hulls, and we could be facing an Exxon Valdez in the Hudson Valley. The rail cars that carry the crude down the Hudson were not designed for this. It's a new level of risk that the Federal Department of Transportation is not properly regulating. So we're really kind of challenging ourselves. How do we respond to this? How do we get the agencies, and there are many, many different theoretically interlocking agencies that have responsibility to protect the communities and the river from this risk, but they're not really very well coordinated. So this is a major new challenge. We're just trying to figure out how to do it. We're organizing communities. We're to alert them to the risk. I'm going to Washington on Monday and Tuesday to meet with federal agencies to get them to advance the regulation to build on Governor Cuomo's leadership in this area. But we're challenged for the first time, at a level that I've never experienced before. So I'm interested in my colleagues and their advice on this, and any thoughts that anybody else has on it.
I don't know that it's an organizational change. I wish I had more time in the day. And I say that, like tongue-in-cheek, I guess, but because of the work that we have to do. I mean, you heard what Ned was saying. I mean, that organization has gone from protecting one mountain to protecting an entire river and all the communities around it. The work that Todd is doing, Harold, Jonathan, I mean, the number of projects that we see on a daily basis that really support the concepts of regionalism, the number of stakeholders that we're trying to engage, and I think the Mid-Hudson Regional Council has done an excellent job with Pattern to really try to get out into the community and educate folks about what the Regional Council is, about regionalism, in a way, if I might dare say, that I don't think has necessarily happened in the same way before. So it's not so much about an organizational shift or an organizational change or reflection, although, for sure, I'm sure that I could find a few things that we could do better. But I think it's more of a function of thinking about how to increase the capacity of what we do by increasing the number of stakeholders and individual towns, villages, and individual community members that we bring to the table and engage in the processes that we're undertaking. Because what we're doing is not just about grants and tax credits in a consolidated funding application. It's really about instructing the governor and instructing state policy on a regional and a local level. The governor meant it, I think, when he said that he wanted to see economic development policies start from the ground up. And that's what we're doing. And it takes an awful lot of effort. And I give kudos to all of the folks around the table because they engage on it. They engage in it daily. It's not just every time they go to a meeting. It is every day. It is all the time. So to that extent, having the ability, I think, to further increase what we do to benefit the larger community, I think would probably be the thing that we'd want to do better.
I think that's a great place to leave it. It's 2 o'clock, but I'm going to give you one quick story. So I follow Ned, and actually next year is Pattern's 50th anniversary. And I went to ask someone for advice on how should we celebrate it, and they were able to go back, 50 years ago. Westchester and Rockland, it was originally called Mid-Hudson Pattern for Progress, and that Rockland and Westchester really weren't supposed to be part of it. Now, 50 years later, thanks to Aimee here, I had an opportunity to sit on the Mass Transit Advisory Board for the Tappan Zee Bridge. And I couldn't think of a capital infrastructure project that actually has more to do with the rest of the valley than the Tappan Zee Bridge. People up here don't always see it that way, but what happens on that bridge in terms of transportation, and as the governor argued for funding, he said, wait a minute, this is part of actually a national transportation system. And therefore, the federal government should be involved in the rebuilding of this bridge. And so I said, in 50 years, the nature and definition of regionalism has changed greatly from whatever our founders thought it was 50 years ago. But I think to Aimee's point, there just isn't enough hours in a day in trying to convince people that we'll get there. Thank you very, very, very much.